All right, welcome to this episode. And I already am feeling really strong need to call you Katrin, even though that's not your real name. And you're the first anonymous person on the show. And I'm curious how juicy it's going to get because I happen to know a bit of your story. And also whether people can stand it because it really is crazy. And so I'm wondering where this is all going to end up.
When I write my book, everyone will point back to this and go,
we knew it all along. Exactly. So to start out with, if you could just paint the broad strokes of how you were raised.
In what sense? The religious sense or like both? Because
I would start with religious, like the really, like, the neighborhood you were in and the type of religion that you were surrounded by, I guess. Then,
the type of neighborhood I grew up with is really interesting because the wider area was a very lower income class of Geordies. Well, actually, I probably shouldn't say Geordie because I don't know if they like to call themselves that. But it's more that around us were, that type of person. Lots of issues going around, lots of drugs and alcohol, lots of knife crime, lots of people really, really struggling. And then within that, at the time, with everyone's going to identify what this area is if they know it, if they're religious, because it's the only area in the world that this is in. It's 300 families who are all, people called us ultra-Orthodox, but we're not Hasidish, so it's whatever the other one is. And this is how you know how long I've left, because I've forgotten all the Jewish words for things.
Lithuanian is oftentimes
with about two Hasidish people who got, only reason they were allowed there was because they were wealthy.
Nice.
So there were 10,000 yeshiva boys and about 5,000 SEM girls within this community as well, because it's mostly used for teaching. As of now, I think there's about 600 families, 700. It has gotten a lot bigger.
Right. So this is a destination in England where people are sent from all over the world to study. And then there's a smaller community locally of people who study there, and they are actually not Hasidic, but they are ultra-Orthodox.
Yeah, and most who there work within the systems of it, although less so now.
Yeah. Obviously. Would you say that there's some sort of unique traits that describe these specific families compared to, let's say, a sampling of 300 families in London or any other?
It's like saying anywhere, what's the difference between 300 families in New York versus a small village in Arkansas? Like you are small town. It's got the small town vibe. You've got your shop that's only open certain hours. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everyone's business, although obviously they're not talking about it, even though everyone seems to know. It's small. I was raised with the same 30 girls from primary school to high school, minus 2 or 3 who left after primary school and 1 left in high school. Like, you are with the same people.
Right. I'm making a note of something I want to ask you in a minute. So what was your experience in that small town religious Jewish community for yourself? How did you experience religion and all that?
I didn't fit in as a person. The religion, only looking back, was part of the catalyst for the not fitting in. It's the rest of me that also didn't fit in. The one asking all the questions that no one wanted to answer. But I also remember being very, very young and never really being the one. I never knew the prayers because I would just mouth along. I'd obviously learn them because of repetition of everyone singing it in your ear. You do learn it, but I couldn't have told you I knew it. So I didn't fit in from a very, 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 very young age. So
what do you think those traits were that made you not fit in?
Being queer.
Being queer. Okay. Yeah, it's a bit of a recurring pattern.
It's clearly something that was from a very young age. I think that my parents were both irreligious growing up, so I was already the odd one out because everyone else grew up in the household where the lineage went on forever. So I was being pointed out as different before I think I realised I was different. Logically, even though I know looking back I probably was different before that anyway. What was your question again?
No, exactly that. So when you say queer, do you mean mostly queer as in like sexual orientation queer or something beyond that?
Both. queer in terms of life, queer in terms of sexuality, queer in terms of weird, queer in terms of what is not acceptable or normal. And it's different because queer in the secular world also fits the same vibe. It's just religious world is much larger divide, and you can't find your own community within it. And no one's
Right.
going, go talk to them instead, because there's no one to talk to.
Right. So you're still equally not fitting in, because queer by definition is not fitting into what is normal, but there's no alternative place to
Yeah.
head to find your people. So what was it like growing up with those tendencies in this kind of community?
Younger, I don't think that was the most visible. It was the loudness and all the bits of me that I now see as neurodiverse, but at the time would have seen as what the hell is they doing? Because I didn't understand the social construct. So when you're in a community that is literally built on that, you say the wrong thing at the wrong time and you're always being told to be quiet or shut up or please sit in the corner because you're about to say something that no one wants to hear or know. But as I got older, it's really funny because I slept with a lot of my classmates. I was very queer, but yet didn't fit in at all, and all of it was a secret and none of it was allowed to be talked about. So, bit of both.
Yeah, I would take a little bit of a tangent, because you have such a background in mental health. I'm curious if you could speak for a minute about this very common tendency that, neurodivergence doesn't fit into religious constructs very well. And there's one part of it where it's like, because we're different, so automatically being different makes you not really fit in. But there's another aspect of it, which I think, and you'll add to this or correct me, where when you're neurodivergent, you really need things to make sense in your own world of making sense. And in the Orthodox communities, and at least in Judaism, what I experienced, nobody ever bothers to really lay things out. Everything is sort of by osmosis and assumed and implied, and everybody just kind of goes with that. And it can fly right over your head when that is how things are transmitted. And moreover, even if they do stop to explain things, you see right through that to like this bigger picture of it's still not making any sense, and they're immediately stymied. Does that resonate? What's your take on that?
Yes, but I also know neurodiverse people who are exact opposite of what you've just said, in terms of they take everything the religion says to the full extent of what they're saying because they've taken it as law. So the social
Right.
construct they are working with is the social construct that the religion has outlined. So it's the exact
Which they
opposite.
appreciate because it's been defined.
Yes,
It's been
it's defined
clearly
by
stated.
themselves. It's not defined. I mean, it's not defined by themselves. It's defined by the religion, and they've taken it as the rule of law. In the same way, people will take like standard constructs within the culture you're brought up in and assume that that's just how it happens. If it doesn't sit well with you, for whatever reason, I think this is where the queerness comes in. None of it fit in, so all of it had to be questioned. The religion was part of it.
Right.
In the same way, neurodiverse people, it's not like if you're queer, you're likely to be neurodiverse, or if you're neurodiverse, you're likely to be queer, but the crossover is so big because when you are already looking at your boundaries and the social constructs around you, why is gender and sexuality not part of that?
Right. And so you can potentially feel free as long as those buttons are pushed. Because
Yeah.
if they're not, you're going to find yourself completely complacent in being an evangelizing
Yes.
for that specific side. My mother comes to mind.
Well, yeah, if you think about a lot of the Seventh-day Adventists or the extreme Mormons, all of them have very neurodiverse traits in the sense that they are parallel, what's the word for it? Like blinkers on.
Yeah.
That is it. That's all they've got. There will be no taking off the blinkers, but that is also a neurodiverse trait in of itself.
Yeah.
So it fits both.
Yeah. Right. And they can very dogmatically exclude everybody else who's not neurodivergent like they are. So, okay, that's I think I think you explained that really well. And so I'm curious about with this question where to put it in, but I was gonna literally wrote a note about asking you if you've been in touch with your classmates since, and then you mentioned sleeping with a lot of them, and so I'm curious if you could speak for a moment to what is that about? How does that work?
Which bit? How does sleeping with someone work?
Yeah, tell me about sex because I grew up religious. What I'm saying is,
Who's the fork?
this whole The when you put them together, they make a spoon. This premise, like, I think if I would ask you, you would say, like, I'm not even religious, I'm stuck here. But how this concept of, an actually probably still self-identified religious person having queer sex, we'll call it, while still being religious, how does that come about? How do they justify it? And final question is, how common is it?
It's more common than anyone realizes. More common in men than women, 100%.
Okay.
Because it's much more visible when someone is sexually excited, as if you have the right appendages. So it's a lot easier to make the move without making a move. The way it worked for me was a lot of, oh, let's just lie in bed. Oh no. Oh no, now you're going to invite me around again, and then you know what's going to happen. And it's interesting because out of the people I slept with who were from the same community I was in, a lot of them became irreligious. Well, no. Well, a lot of them are dead, but some of them became irreligious. Some of them, a few of them stayed very religious and basically ignored me. And some of them pretended it never happened after it did the first time. And I became either, haha, that was just so funny, or we're not going to pretend like that's just no. Whereas the later, I think it's easier to satisfy your sexual urges because it's not a man. It doesn't count. There's
Right.
nowhere really that says it counts in the same way that it does. Like, you're not losing your virginity because virginity is only able to be taken by a man. And you can still get married
Right.
and say that. You're just, it's not as if masturbation or anything else is discussed, which we
Right.
all know
So
does
you're able to.
happen. So there's no line. It's like once you're crossing a somewhat line, where does the next line draw?
Right. There is no extra lines because it's of little concern to the rabbis, basically.
Yeah. So in the same
Yeah.
way, it's like if I'm told eating on Yom Kippur is a sin, then if I'm going to eat, I may as well eat bacon because it's the same. There's no line that says that one's better than the other. When you're in a world
Yeah.
where the black and white is so black and so white.
Yeah. And so close to home.
Yeah.
So it's easy to transgress. And once you're there, you're in a free fall or whatever you want to
Well,
call it.
particularly with female sexuality because it's even more not discussed. It is
Yeah.
probably discussed more than it ever was. But like, we didn't get period health, for example. They only started it when someone ended up in A&E saying they were bleeding from school, and it turned out they'd got their period and their parents hadn't told them what it was, which is when they started
Oh,
giving us a little purple book called You and Your Present, I think it was called.
with a girl with a flower on the cover blowing at
Yeah, something like that.
smelling. Yeah.
Like this are at. So you think they're discussing safe body content and masturbation and what it's like for women? No.
Right. I love that story about ending up in the.
I mean, it must have been
And you
terrifying
mentioned,
for them.
yeah, for sure. Like, no one tells you anything. It's similar to those stories of which I've heard from a gynecologist of all those married couples who get married and don't get pregnant because they literally don't know how to have sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard of anyone directly?
No, because we
experienced
have very good. My sister and I discussed how, not obviously in acute detail, but they got real proper diagrams and images and things to, yeah, they
Okay.
got real comprehensive education, more than I thought they did. But I
Right.
also
Okay.
only know what women get. I'm interested to know what the men get.
What the men get. So you said some of your classmates are dead at this point.
Yes.
I want to get. Can you elaborate on that?
No, not classmates, but people I slept with.
From the
They,
religious community.
yeah, they
What
got
happened to
into
them?
drugs. Then there's a very
Okay.
free fall down that slide, as they say. Channel 4 did a documentary called We Are Other, and they're saying that the main reason people leave religion are drugs and alcohol, mental health, and sexual child abuse in general. All three of them, in every sector, in every section of religion, in every group, leads to suicide and leads to death.
Right.
So the chances of the people who have left religion in any group, and that's minus you losing all your support system if you do, is likely to lead to death. So I know
Mm-hmm.
3 people who have died.
Mm-hmm. And there's a bit of stereotype around like when I was growing up, because it was almost like an agenda to ostracize anyone who did leave religion, and this image of the drug-addled, sexual, promiscuous, ex-religious person was very much perpetuated. I've parodied it actually on my own website, and I'm curious. Can you speak to that? Is there an element of truth to that? Why is it happening? And I guess there's this thing like, "Aha! I told you so. If you didn't get addicted to drugs, you wouldn't leave religion." Like, I want to kind of
I mean, I would say
address that.
drugs comes after the leaving the religion or after the mental health and the abuse. I don't think drugs come first a lot of the time. Sometimes they do.
Okay,
At the same
right.
time, I can't speak for everyone, but the people I know, I would say it is. It's not that it's always true, but obviously the things that you are completely denied and are so educated upon in secular world, you will have this is how dangerous sex can be, this is how dangerous drugs can be, this is where you go for mental health support. When you don't have that, trying, it's the same as why if the line is so black and white, once I'm smoking a joint, what's the difference between that and heroin? Because I know no different.
And they are actually equated, right? In
Yeah,
the world, it's like it's the same thing. Like if you're smoking a joint, you may as well be smoking heroin. That is the messaging
yeah.
you get.
So why
So
not?
you're saying there's an ignorance, right? So there's a component of ignorance and lack of education that permeates there as well and
Uh,
makes everything
and
worse.
I would say also, if you don't have access to education and you don't have access to proper housing and you don't have access to proper support, the people you're going to be around to offer that support are A, going to be quite predatory, so you're more likely to end up in the sex and drug world, and B, your mental health is going to fail, and the things around you on offer that make you feel better are the things that end up throwing you down that path that you may not realize is bad until you're addicted, and then you're like, well, I'm stuck now because I've become the
Right.
person that everyone else says I am, so I can't go ask them for support, but also they're going to make me want to be religious. And you have no ability to access the irreligious world because depending on who you are, that's not a possibility, particularly if you only spoke Yiddish or Yinglish, as
Mm,
they call it here. You just don't know that there are services that exist to begin with.
right. Right. So there might be either a language or a literal knowledge barrier where in your own country, can't seek the help that you need, and you're in a crisis
Yeah,
just by leaving.
you
Right.
can access it technically, but do you know where to go and how to do it, and that there are forms involved and there's so much other involvement. And
Right.
I would say a lot of people who leave religion end up with other people who are also irreligious. So it becomes
Okay.
well, if my friend's doing this and then it worked for them, why won't I try that?
Right. So you drag each other down
Yeah.
in a way.
I do think it's gotten better purely because of the internet. There are more
Mm.
resources out there than there were however many years ago, because I can't work out how old I am and what age I left and work backwards.
You're an OG lever. Yeah. So if we can return to that and continue that line. So in some ways, you were not aligned with this stuff from the age of zero, pretty much. Like it never really worked for you, which is a type of religious lever I've found over time. And so, what was your journey out then? How did that play out in practicality?
I got kicked out of school, really helps. They don't want me there. So I left school and joined seminary. There were three options for me. Two of them were a definite no, and one was the easiest to say yes to. And then got caught. Someone tattled on me that I was reading inappropriate books in the school. And I think I lent them to someone, probably. And he called me in, the rabbi, and was just like, unfortunately, we aren't inviting you back for the second year. And to hide that from everyone, I think got sent to Israel. But I think my sister sat down with my father and was like, if you leave her to rot somewhere else, she'll end up pregnant, dead, or drugged up. And that's when the decision was made that maybe we should find you somewhere to go. But I was very lucky because both sets of my grandparents are irreligious, which means that they knew what that wider world would look like for someone, not in the same way as understanding what it's like for a religious person to end up in that space. But if they just sent me to go to London or go somewhere else that is get a job, whatever, the world would have been exactly what that I would not be surprised if that would have been my life journey of who would I've stayed with, and if I would have stayed with a Jew, and how well would that have gone? Would I have run away? Because once the freedom is there, the freedom is there. Whereas having the structure of a new country kind of helped settle me in. And also, I didn't really want to be, no, I didn't want to be stupid, but like I didn't, looking back, I think all I wanted was some stability, and having the option of a structure for a while, I think really worked for my brain of going, well, I'll do this first and then I can keep going and just slowly adjust what I need out of my life or in.
Mm-hmm. And so let me fill in some gaps. So you're in elementary school and you get kicked out. So you go to seminary, which is like,
No,
I guess, high
every
school.
school is primary school. Then I went to high school, then to seminary. So it's
You
like
got kicked out.
16, 15, 16.
So did you get kicked out and basically end up in seminary early?
No, I got kicked out. They can't. So in our community, you weren't allowed to be kicked out of high school because there are no other high schools that would cater for a Jew. So you'd have to leave the community. Unfortunately, I was the last. Fortunately and unfortunately, I was the last one for that to be allowed. And after that, the next round of people did get kicked out because they were like, "We'll send you to Manchester and London." Whereas at that point, there weren't enough women to cause a drama. Well, they would send the boys away, no problem, but sending girls away, well,
Right.
Whereas now they do.
So okay, so you make your way through, but by sheer rules, like they put up with you for years and years, and then you ended up in seminary, which is like basically a local post high school type of experience, and that did not last. Do you remember what book you were reading? I'm curious what this scandalous.
I have a feeling it was a book I remember lending is Harry Potter, but it's considered a really, really, really bad book because of how popular it is. It makes it worse.
Right. Right.
I mean, I did read other shit, but I can't remember them.
Right. I hear.
I just remember.
And so then you ended up getting sent not to another city, which would have been worse for you because it would have been sort of in limbo and more of the same. You actually ended up, if I recall, in Israel, right? And that was better?
Yes, and only because they tried to find a seminary that had, in Israel, that had a mixture of like quite religious people to less religious people, so that I could be like the more religious ones. So there's basically they had no idea what they were doing. And they ended up sending me to somewhere that had 3 layers of rules for like the more religious ones, the medium religious ones, and the less religious ones. But the joys of it being Israel / America / they really didn't have English people is that there was no record of which one I had been signed up for. So when I turned up, they were like, "Which one were you?" There's 3. I went, "Oh, that one." And I went to the lower one. So the rules were completely different. You had to do a lot less lessons. You had to do a lot less. Your curfew was later. You were staying somewhere else. The people, obviously, I then became friends with were here because their parents were like, "We need you just to do a year in Israel," kind of vibe, rather than, "I want to become religious." And my parents are like, "Okay, you can do a year there first before you." It was very that vibe rather than religious people trying to become more religious. It was the other way around. There were obviously a few who got Aished or Israeli, "Oh God, I'm now in Israel, I have to be religious," but most of them were modern Orthodox Americans.
Mm-hmm. And that wasn't the intent of the people who sent you, obviously.
No.
And they actually signed you up for the more religious program because you were so religious.
Yes.
And then you just did the good old switcheroo on your first day and ended up having a year there. And that was, I guess, a year where you're out of the community and you have more freedom than you've ever had before, in a way.
Yes, and a lot of drinking happened.
A lot of drinking happened. Yeah. And so you would define that year as the year you left religion, I guess, in a more official way?
I don't think it is, because I think I left beforehand. Is the year that it cemented to me that I could make it my life, because my plan was to die. So it was easier to see that it's worth trying to, not trying, but seeing what happens.
Mm-hmm. So if we don't mind making this darker for a moment, your plan was to die. Can you speak to that?
I think it's just very self-explanatory. The plan was to die. I think I told myself when I was 15 I'd get to 18, and then 18 at 20, and then 20 to 20. Like I get giving myself a few more years of going, as long as it keeps getting better in one way, shape or form, let's try it for another year, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the plan was eventually, like, hitting 30 was never the plan. It was supposed to end then. Unfortunately, you got involved. Things went off the rail. I mean, life also fucked me over in a different way. But the plan was very much, and mental health and neurodiversity and queerness all obviously play into that. Of it's not just like I am an odd one out, even in the secular world, in many, many ways.
Yeah.
Something I really was expecting to disappear, but in fact has gone the other way around and been something that I love. So
Mm-hmm.
I've had to allow the changes to happen. Some of it was very forced, as in, like, I need to make sure I go to a school and get an education of some kind, because that keeps you alive. Having access to the secular world. And ironically, even though it's horrible to say, is time, because you feel less like a foreigner when you know social history. Definitely helped. And being friends with a lot of foreign people, so I felt exactly like they did. And that happened obviously very quickly.
So I want to unpack this because, I mean, it's broad. It doesn't really relate just to your story, but again, I think it's very useful information. Starting with backtracking just a little bit, is it common for, I guess, two questions. One is, was things already getting a little bit better that you're like, oh, I'm on some sort of trajectory, so if I keep waiting, things might get better? Like, did you have any sort of data that indicated that things would get better at 15? And then I'm curious if that's a common trait of people who are suicidal, to kick the can down the road a little bit and be like, I'm going to give myself a date.
The first question,
did you have any data that things were going to get better?
Yes, my father had left the house, which definitely helped, because he was the main carrier of the bigger abuse. I think the older I get, the more I'm unpacking my mother's shit, but it's a very different kind. So him not being in the picture definitely helped. Seeing the household get more normal helped. Getting older just generally does help, because you have more of a mindset, you've got more years on you. I would be interested if I could have asked myself this question at that time. I probably would have said no. But there clearly was something that gave me another year or two to try it. And then it just I honestly don't know why. I don't think I could have tell you now. And at the time, I'm not sure I could have told you. But there clearly was something keeping me going, because otherwise I'd be dead.
Right.
I think I also didn't want to do a really drastic death. I needed to, like, find the right way to do it that people could just be like, oh yeah, that's fine. And that probably took a lot longer to find too.
Is that because you didn't want to disturb those around you?
Yes, and I think I was very aware that if it was a bigger thing, my siblings would be massively impacted by it. Not in terms of their own behaviour, but that they would be trapped in the house because no one would marry them.
Okay.
Because that's how religion works.
They're standing in the community. Yeah. And you needed to be writing off as an accident.
Yeah, basically. So that's where the bad behavior comes in, because if someone else kills you, oh, you're fine.
Right. And so transitioning from there, you seem to have alluded to like three things that you attribute to keeping you alive at this point. And one is, you said time, and I'm curious if you could elaborate on what you meant by, I think you said something like your social history. And then you said just making sure you got an education, associating with other foreigners. Those are all factors that you feel have contributed to your, I don't know if healing necessarily, but certainly survival.
Finding somewhere that works. So in terms of like social commentary and foreigners, is that I was friends with a lot of people who were very new in the country. So when people go, what's this? And you don't realize how much it happens until you don't have it. So knowing this is how you open a door to someone, or this is what you say to say goodbye, or this song is, and everyone goes, do you remember when? Or have you seen this movie? None of it was there. Absolutely none of it. But the friends I had also didn't know. In fact, a lot of them had more than me, because they had access to the internet at least, and they had access to American TV shows. So my entry to the world was also very American based and not British based. So when I came to England, post all my drama in Israel, the switch was also new, but at the same time I knew how to flab it, whatever the word is. Like, I knew how to fake it also, but at the same time was friends with people who felt very similarly, which is why the older I get, mixed with time and that, means that now I can go, do you remember that? But that 10 years ago, I was here.
Okay, so integration time,
Yeah.
meaning you get to experience 10 years of history within it. Now you're on track, more or
Yeah.
less. Now you're looped in.
It
So
still
now you know
happens.
who.
People will go, oh,
Yeah,
remember when this happens as a child? And there's things that, mostly the stuff that everyone my age will have seen, watched, experienced, dealt with from till 22 is still, some of it I've
right,
obviously seen or watched or heard, because in history I had a little, for a few years I made sure to go back and kind of find out some of this stuff. But at the same
right,
time, it still catches me off guard, and I'm like, oh no, not that. And people forget, knowing me, that I'm also someone who doesn't know. They'll go, you're British, do you
right.
know? And I'll go, no, I don't. Sorry.
Exactly.
But I also don't mind as much.
Right. Because you have more to go on that you do know, right? It's
Yeah, but
balanced
also
out.
I am more settled within it, so I'm less evasive of my history now. So rather than being like, I'm going to have to pretend to fit in, I now don't longer really care about fitting in, because I found the people who I don't fit in with. So the people who are asking don't know me, and I don't owe them an explanation. And the people who will ask are not asking in a way of, why do you not know? It's now a, shall we find out together, or how can, oh yeah, forget that you don't know kind of behavior, which obviously doesn't matter when it's someone that you like or know.
Right. Right. So I was going to ask a brilliant question.
Of course, it's the one you
Oh
forget.
yes, okay. So there's education. So it seems like you made a point of
Yes.
both making sure you got educated formally to some degree, which you said is important for survival, and also informally, right? Going back, like you mentioned, and making sure some of those cultural gaps and stuff were filled in. What was that journey like, coming from, let's call it, complete ignorance?
I was very lucky, and I think a lot of religious women would probably say similarly, is that we are social carers. We're carers anyway. So the choice into what I studied was very easy, because I had the background purely from having however many siblings I had, and the only jobs you could get are working with disabled people, because if you have 12 kids, the last 3 are likely to be disabled because their mother's 50 odd or whatever. So the disability stats within the religious community are massively high, and that is the sector I was already had to be involved in, because that is the only jobs I could have got, being the age of whatever, 12 I think I started work, 10 or 11 I started work. So the switch from that to doing social care was really, really easy, because they just need you to show that you have life experience. And as long as I had my maths and English, which I did have also, got a C, but that is honestly I don't know what my life would have looked like if I hadn't done it, because I don't think I'd have had the mental energy, the whereabouts to do my English and maths as an adult. So having that massively helped, because you can't go to uni without it. You have to have done it.
Right. If you had dropped out of high school for any reason, you wouldn't have had the bandwidth to fill in those gaps.
I did not at the
Pretty much.
100%
Yeah.
not at the time. They would have put me on a course, but I don't think I would have passed.
Right.
So entry to the entry level of education was relatively smooth, and also meant that the ability to get funding for that, I fit all the criteria. The joys of a country that obviously pays less now, but at the time had much better structure for people who are leaving, who wanted to up their skill levels. So I got funded. So the course was free. The only thing I had to pay for was rent. And
Right.
I could get funding for that, but at the same time, the joys, as I said, the joys of having extended family that were irreligious is that even though none of them said it to me that they were the ones paying for it, they were the ones paying for it. Because I would ask my father, who has no money, and he'd ask the people who did have money, who'd give it to me, but obviously they couldn't say that, he couldn't say that, I couldn't say that, all this fake little drama going on, that actually they were the ones paying for it and I was the one getting an education. And switching from that to uni was really a choice I didn't really make. It's the only thing I could do. I don't think I would do that now if I had my own brain then. I think I would do something like plumbing or something really practical and hands-on. Although at the same time, doing the course that I did and the degree that I did and the reading that I had to do because of it, I think was the beginning steps of doing my own CBT and therapy. Because when you're sitting in a course and they're going, this is what having abuse in your childhood is look like, this is what ACEs are like, this is all the training that you do, that when you have therapy, that's the beginning steps of they're going, this is just an understanding of what it's like to be you, was happening to me in a professional setting, which also meant that I didn't have to register it because I just knew it. I didn't have to go, this is me. But there's no way to not go, oh God, 10 of those ticks are me. 8 of those ticks are me. Out of the 20, I'm hitting 19 of them. And like now I realize that's what I was doing. It was almost like self-educating myself about myself using the course I was doing. And also I was very good at it. So it did help that too.
Yes. So that's fascinating. And I've heard this from other people too, how studying psychology because you're fascinated by it or interested in it as a career still ends up being a healing process and understanding yourself better. And I guess you're describing that you had a choice to go into like the caring professions. You had so much experience and I think your personality does lend itself to it, or like something super practical, like the trades, like hands-on kind of thing. Is that just describe 2 different tendencies within you, 2 different skill sets?
Yes, 100%. And I still do. When I had how many? Oh my God, it was before COVID. A few years ago. So I was going to say last year, but it's not last year. When my job was really quiet, I signed up and did a plumbing course. So I'm a level 3 qualified plumber and I absolutely loved it. I have fixed numerous people's sinks and taps and toilets. I don't think I'd ever do it as a job now because I am too good at what I do now to take a step back, and I get paid enough that I don't want to take the 4 or 5 years to get to the same place. And my brain is not malleable in the same way it was when I was 20. But yes, I am the joys of, and the older I get and the more I'm realizing the autism in my father and the ADHD in my mother has created a wonderful combination of practical and crazy. One of my really good friends likes to call me a rhombus. Do you know what that is? So if you think of a rectangle or a square, a rhombus is just that, but a bit off.
Okay, yeah.
But parallel lines, but off. She's like, you are very square, but you're not. You're just, everything's that, but I think that describes me quite well.
Yeah. So yeah, what
there's so much. Yeah, pick a thread.
Yeah. I'll pick a thread. I think the thread that I want to continue on because of your unique perspective, especially. I'll ask you more. We've already spoke to this, but what was your biggest struggle in adjusting? And if it's just that social part, we can move on to the next question. But like, were there any other struggles in coming out of religion? Was there? I guess this is a better question. Here's a better one. Considering the fact that part of you was never bought in the first place to religion, was there still things that you had to unlearn, that they had somehow gotten into your head despite all of your defense systems?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know if I've ever really thought that one through. That is actually really interesting. Probably loads. Like I know I had to specifically train myself out of being, I don't want to say racist because I don't think we ever were, but we didn't know any Black people. So I didn't know queer history. I didn't know world history. The religious Jews are not known for being accepting of other groups of people. And I purposely, this is the other thing, because I knew this is where I wanted to be, and I was paranoid that I would end up in 5 years failing and having to go back, because as with everyone, you can end up going back and say, hi, I'm religious again. And they go, come, please, write a book about it. Tell us about how you found God again. I was absolutely terrified of that happening. I used to study what things I didn't understand to make sure none of it reached in, which I think is how I've ended up as a really open-minded, accepting people. Where I think it's stuck, ironically, is I was very anti-Semitic for a very, very long time. And I hated young mothers because that's what everyone was doing. And I just think that I obviously understand the point of a young mum, but when you've got 3 kids and you're under 24, it's always been my little sticking point of going, if you're going to continue, that is, you've shifted your life in a way that you can't know the impact because you're too young. Your
Mm-hmm.
brain is literally
Yeah.
not developed until you're 25. Wait, 25 and over, I'm happy with anything that you do. Yes, you can still be an idiot, but you are not literally an idiot in terms of your head. Your brain is
Right.
developed. I'm trying to think if there's any other. I mean, I think sex was obviously a big one, but at the same time, it's very easy to get over it, even if it's internalized, because as long as you keep doing it, it gets easier and easier. I think like putting on jeans for the first time was a really hard one, just because it felt disgusting. And then I was like, what? Like, I was very good at going, no, this is clearly what it is, and moving on. You're probably better off asking other people what I was stuck with, because I wouldn't tell you what, I wouldn't know what they are, because they either fit society anyway, or so I never had to address them, or I'm not aware of them, because if I was aware of them, they were not going to be there very long.
So you very deliberately worked through a lot of the things. That's what you're describing.
Yes.
Like whether it's open-mindedness, even towards Jews and
That took
young
a
mothers,
lot longer.
less, yeah, or genes or sex. I'm curious on that vein because I just find it fascinating. The difference between, I guess, a male body and a female body in that journey. I think a female body can get a lot more sex if it so desires and get over that maybe more quickly. I'm curious if
It's
you've
also a
seen or
lot
if
more
you have it.
violent, or it can be a lot more violent.
Yes,
That
and
was the
subject
most
to abuse.
interesting, is losing or gaining white privilege. That was the most interesting thing of it, because as a religious person, you're spat, like I was spat on, got bleach thrown at me. You walk around with this constant knot of fear that someone will jump out at you, and the area I grew up in fed into that massively, because around us were people who were jumping each other anyway. Oh, let's pick on the religious Jew is a little easier, especially an innocent looking woman. I got flashed, the amount of like, not sexual violence in terms of being attacked, but it was lots of pulling, touching, shoving, here's my penis type of sexual violence
By the
by the
broader
irreligiousness.
lower class
Yeah.
non-religious people around your community.
Yeah, we had local
Right.
flashers,
Okay.
which doesn't really. It's something I've mentioned to someone. They're like, What the fuck are you mentioning? Like, that's just not a thing." And I was like, "Oh, like it was a massive thing for us." Clearly, because it's that
So
whole flashing young innocent women. Being a woman in general is a traumatizing thing in a world where men are perpetuating violence. So
right.
unlearning. Well, I had to learn it first of all, because now I was letting them near me. I was having male friends. I was having men around me, and also, and it was interesting because a lot of people who are queer go, "Oh, I discovered later on I liked women," whereas for me it was the other way around. It was like, "Oh my god, I actually also like men." Oh god, no. This is terrifying, because women were always safe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
learning to keep myself safe in a sexual world took some time and some violence to get there.
Right. I hear that. And so what was this privilege that you eventually gained?
Well, I
That you
lost it
speak
very
of?
quickly by shaving my head and looking very queer. But I gained it's white privilege, although it's obviously the thing about growing up the way I am is that you don't really lose it internally. You just lose it in terms of no one stops you in the street, no one side-eyeing you. The fear around you is not as palatable. Like, you talk to people of color or people who are very openly camp, this is what they talk about. It's that you can be attacked at any point in any way because of how you look like, and you can't change that because this is who you are.
Right.
So the joy of it being a religious based thing and me being very white looking is that if I put on jeans
Yeah.
and a t-shirt, no one's going to look at me twice.
And you moved out of the circumstance in which it was very much attracting
Yeah.
that type of behavior,
It
and you
took a
found yourself in the
long
mainstream with a
time
lot more
to feel
common.
safe, though. That's a very different thing. A long time to actually feel safe.
Because of the residual fear that remained from before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, I'm assuming some adverse experiences even afterwards as you're trying and
Yeah, but
failing and trial and error.
then you
Yeah.
learn as
It
being a
just
woman,
adds.
but that is never going to go
Right.
away.
Yeah. And so kind of reflecting back on this more broadly, I value a lot your unique perspective on things. What would you want more people to understand about your journey in general?
about my particular journey or people
No,
who
I would say
leave?
maybe more broadly, just because your journey is so unapplicable to anybody else. I'm kidding.
I mean,
But
I doubt it is. I'd love to
the,
find someone who actually that's not true. I actually know someone. I went to a sex positive event, like where their performers are all sex workers, and someone comes up to me and is like, "Hi," I'm like, "Who is this?" Oh God, shit! Well, there's my name.
see,
Hi, you're gonna have to edit it out.
I
And
will.
someone said hi, and I just turned around and was like, "Who are you?" Like, you don't remember me, but one time you were outside one of the like the religious restaurants in the area I'd moved to, and I was walking past, and I was married, covered. I was covering my hair, and I was trying to get pregnant. And we stopped outside, and we had a really long chat about how you were struggling with your having to see your family now that you'd left religion. And she's like, having that conversation, A, made me realize I was sexually attracted to women, and B, that I needed to leave my husband. So I was like, I mean, I love that that was a massive journey for you, but also like, I don't remember you at all. There's one person who was just like, you want to talk to me? Here you go.
Yeah.
So I would be interesting to see more British people who leave, because it's a very different thing than Americans. The way that they
Oh,
view the
okay.
world is bigger. The world here is smaller. There's only three to, if you're not Hasidish, you've only got three communities to be part of to begin with. It's obviously gotten bigger
Okay.
because they keep having kids. But I think the thing about religion in general and leaving it is that it's you're very alone, and at the same time it just depends on your own personal circumstances, because if you are losing everything, it's everything that you're losing. Not that it's an
Mhm.
actual loss, because it needs to be lost, but when you're losing everything, the things that catch you are mostly not good things. And I think that is happens for everyone. The things that catch you are people who prey on vulnerable people. It's drugs. It's definitely alcohol, especially in a culture here where alcohol is readily available everywhere. It's working minimum wage jobs because you just need to survive. So why, if I have no respect for my body because my body's already been told it's awful, why is that different than selling it? And not that sex work is a bad thing. It's that sex work is a bad thing if that's what you're doing it for, is to keep going rather than a choice. And only because it impacts the rest of your life, not because in of itself, as men sell their bodies all the time as laborers, as working for the going to the army is a massive one for men. That is selling your body just as much, but you are not going to end up with HIV. You're not going to end
Right.
up with a pregnancy that you forgot about and then you've still got a child. Like, the idea of me having a child within that is absolutely insane to me. And I
Right.
could have, and I didn't. And I made that was the best decision I have ever made, because imagine me with a 13-year-old. I think I worked out yesterday. That's how old they would be. Like that, I would likely not be alive, and they would not be a healthy child.
Right. Yeah. So the concept that are you saying almost all the more so in England, if somebody or in Britain, if somebody leaves religion, they're even more lost in a way because there is fewer options to leave and the sheer amount of risks that they face when doing so.
More so now, but the problem you have is that we have a benefit system, and you have a system that's set up for people to fail, but you have to know how to access it. You have to know the dance that you do. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm leaving religion. Can I sign up?" They'll be like, "But how are you looking for a job? But how do you look for a job? I want to get educated. But how do you get educated? How can I afford to get educated while I'm struggling to look for work?" So it's the amount of tenacity you need to leave, but the chances are that you don't have any because your mental health is shot to shit and you're trying to leave religion and survive. So it's like a double-edged
Yeah.
sword. I don't know what it's like for America. They have an even worse social system, but at the same time, moving within so you're nowhere near anyone you know is easier. And I think that
Okay. I
does
hear that.
help. So you're like, if you're like, "Oh, I'm moving to Texas," you can say, "Well, that's fine. There's a Jewish community there. You're fine." But when you get there, no one's going to check up on you to find out if whether you've gone to synagogue or if you've made the religion. You could just go somewhere else. I mean, I'm sure there is also people who stalk their kids and all of that other shit, but if the family are not absolutely insane, you could never see that people again.
Right. And so kind of taking it back more personally, when you look back on your whole arc, and it's been years now, has there been something in particular, I'll just ask two questions at once, in particular that you found to be healing that really helped you move past things? And I know you've mentioned some already, so if there's more, if not, you don't have to add anything. And in general, how have you found meaning at this point? Is meaning important to you, and have you found it?
The biggest thing that has helped me through are people, although don't tell them that.
Whatever.
It's 100% people. But I also have to acknowledge it was me trying to find the people that also helped. So taking each lump of shit that happened as a stepping stone to climb out of the shit pile rather than a thing to bury me. There, something my mother said recently where she was like, you seem to have an ability to just take what's thrown at you and go, okay, cool. But I don't know where that comes from, and I'm not really willing to investigate it until it goes, in case it goes. But there seems to have been a spark in me that's willing to be alive. And I kind of let that take over for a very, very long time. Obviously, therapy massively helped, more to find out where that's coming from and also to heal the rest of the shit. There seems to be, it was a very, very small drop, but the very, very small drop that seems to control or had controlled quite a large portion of me. I think the biggest thing post being 20 whatever is the person I at the time loved the most in the entire world died, and coinciding with the start of my therapy journey meant, as my therapist at the time wonderfully said, not you, said, everything the world fell on you when you were younger, but you somehow managed to find a little cave in it that kept you going. The world has fallen again, but we're going to put it back together properly now because you are in a place to do that. And I think that explains how I stayed alive, but also why I'm doing as okay as I am now, because it got put back properly. Well, I say properly as you can for broken boards to begin with.
Yeah.
And meaning is people. I honestly think it's people. It's humanity. It's having to believe. It's believing that you are only here to do better. I'm a firm believer that we are born with however many you want to call it, but like we are born with a colour, I want to call it. Some of it red being the bad, blue being the good, or whatever. I don't like using red as bad because red is not a bad colour, but it always gets used as a bad colour. And our aim in life is to be put back in where everything is the good colour. And that's the aim, is just to produce as much good as you possibly can, because there is so much shit. And it's so created by so few people that control the rest of that shit. You can't solve the world's problem. You can only not solve yourself, but like make yourself a better person, because the energy you're emitting then is positive. There's no way around that. So I think it's more spiritualism rather than religion, which is probably where it fits in, that idea where we're all interconnected. And there's no way round believing that, because we literally drink the water that someone else has pissed, if you view it that way. Like, we are built of our mothers. We create what our next generation are going to drink and eat and create. So how can you not believe that we're interwoven? So
right,
just be positive, or as good as you possibly can be. Obviously, there's some things that never get. There's no way to change your circumstances. There's no way to be like, oh, well, now I am this. But work on it.
Right. And to draw that metaphor, it's mostly about painting yourself, right? So if I can paint more of myself blue, I will be sort of spreading that blue to the world as well by virtue of me going through it. So you're emphasizing the importance of like the investment in self.
Yeah, that, and invest in your community, because that's what happens. You cannot learn alone. You cannot develop alone. You cannot do it. There's no way. In the same way, you can sit there in therapy all you want and talk about your triggers, but until you're triggered, you don't know whether you're doing it right. So
Right.
You don't know if you're a healthy lover until you have someone who you love. You don't know if you're a healthy friend until your friend comes to you and you become one. You don't know if you're good at your work until work throws some shit at you and you still conquer it and be. So it's the community aspect of it that is how you also heal yourself.
Nice. And on that line, the last few minutes, I would love for you to share some advice with anybody else who might be leaving. And I think especially, I think would value the community isolation is such a big part that it always comes up with when talking to people. And you have really navigated that. So any advice that you have, any resources, any, advice to yourself, other people or your younger self, and especially themed around community and community building, what that looks like.
It's finding what about you that you think you could stick with. So for me, it was finding a lot of other queer people. So that is there's no one who doesn't have a community. So whether it's, oh, I'm only friends with my friends from work, that's still a community. Oh, I'm only friends with my family. That's whatever community someone has had. Your religious one is the one that's the most palatable to you now because it's the one you know. But it's the starting to find whatever it is that you find happiness while you're religious. Try and find that elsewhere. So if you like painting, go find a painting group. If you like going for a walk, go to a walking group. If you find that one thing that has nothing to do with religion, that you don't need to find a connecting point with whoever it is. Try and do it with even if you hate walking, try it, because you never know. And you never know who you may meet. But I think that's how you create community, is finding something else that connects you. And then the connection can go because you've got the community then of the person. It's also realizing that community is not about the same group of people. It's about you finding home in multiple people in multiple different ways, and they become your community rather than they are its own community. You may find also that, but you need to be the center of your own community, but at the same time offer that to the people who you offer it to. That makes sense?
It does, meaning, first of all, what I'm hearing is you don't need to have your lifelong friends or whatever the friends you make always be surrounded by the fact that you went on a walking meetup together. It could be you both went and both hated it and neither of you go again, but now you meet up weekly for coffee, right? So that's one. The interests are just a means to an end. And then the second part, that religion sets it up really conveniently where the same 100 people are always in the same box every week hanging out. But it doesn't, you could have a motley collection of friends. You could be the connector, but even if not, you have all these friends that you've met in all sorts of eclectic places, and you collect the people that mean a community to you.
100%.
And it's a subjective experience, a constellation around yourself.
Yes, and the biggest piece of advice to get that is be willing to be rejected. Don't take that personally and just ask, because you don't know how many times you're going to have to ask. The asking will mean that someone will say yes. And that's something that I got really, really good at, is just going, can I? Or can I join? Do you want to come for a drink? I'm new to this city area. I want to talk to you about walking, if walking's the example we're using. Like, I want to go shopping for shoes. Can you show me how that works? Someone will say no. You do another walk, ask someone else. Because the more you ask, and the people who answer yes are also more likely to be the people you want to be friends with. But at the same time, steal all your friends' friends. It always helps.
Exactly. Never fails. I love it. Thank you so much. And before we stop, I wanted to offer you seem in particular might enjoy this, if you have any questions from me.
Oh, should have come prepared.
It is in the Google Doc. I don't know if you saw the Google Doc, so I do try to pay, but it's not highlighted, so that
it's not highlighted because you want anyone to come with like, here's like 10 questions.
But yeah, I just feel it's fair, if I've just grilled you for an hour.
How many have you done of these?
I think you're the 6th.
What's the common? How many women?
Mostly women. I actually had 2 men, of which one is my gay brother.
Do you you have to identify him as your gay brother?
I
Out of
do not have
interest.
to
You
identify
just
him. It's interesting that of the few men, it's still a sort of
well,
a
I want. Do you think
queer-ish
that's
type of thing.
because the women are more comfortable talking about their emotions, or the fact that men fit more comfortably in the mix between religion and non-religion, as you yourself do, because you're male? So women have to actually leave to be themselves, whereas men don't have to.
I think that actually, from what I've spoken with people, that is actually a higher number of men who have left religion than women.
Yeah, obviously,
That's my sense, right? So I think there's actually more men out there who I could potentially be interviewing for this podcast.
but they can
I think
leave smoothly in a way that women can't.
it could be they leave smoothly, but I would actually almost describe it as the opposite. Similar to comfortable with emotion, similar to the reasons why women more often end up in therapy. It's a healthier thing to do, but men don't do it for a variety of cultural reasons and such. And so I think even it might be as self-fulfilling as several of the people who I've interviewed have come through support groups. So I'll post on Reddit, I'll post on a group,
Uh,
and the fact that people are even hanging out there, it's like the selection bias, I think,
yes.
might be what's going on right now. So if I post on a group, the people in the group are maybe more women who are trying to support each other through what is a difficult journey, and the man's like raw dogging it alone somewhere and coming up angry and shit. I've seen all of that, and so I think we might be tapping into some of that here.
What's been the common thing then? Because I don't know that many women who've left religion, so I'm interested in what do you think the common denominator is? Are there common denominators? Do you
That's a
find that
great
there is the
question.
main three things that research has shown? Are you finding that?
It's interesting. First of all, I've interviewed actually a fair amount of Christians at this point of the six. So it's been interesting to see some of the differences. Amongst the Christians, I notice a pattern where some of them are really bothered by this premise that everyone's going to hell unless they know Jesus, but they've literally never heard of Jesus in their life. It's actually a very theological question, but it's a glaring one. I remember having similar issues also as a Jewish person, but the theology of Christianity is in that way even more exclusionary and more black and white. Like Jews kind of have a place for everybody, sort of, and Christians are like, you're going to hell if you don't know Jesus,
No, Jews
but
are
most of
you're
the world doesn't
going
know
to
Jesus.
heaven. You may just stop on the way to hell if you're bad.
Things like that.
There's a
Yeah,
difference.
and also Jews are not very clear on where the non-Jews fit in, but they're not as like there's some sort of dirt under their feet type of narrative that I grew up with. The other part that seems to be a common denominator is either being queer yourself or being concerned for queer rights, right? Even if you're quite straight,
Yeah.
but this real frustration with how, and I could say even more broadly, all these people, pretty much one by one, are people who at least some way didn't fit in, right? You have some sort of natural non-conforming tendencies. You're an independent thinker, separate interests, deep feeler, right? So like all of those things, you're then bombarded all the time with values that you don't agree with. Some of them have spoken about how for a time they needed that because it created a sense of safety. But eventually, when you get old enough and you don't need that level of protection from your parents or from the big, broad, scary world, it starts really eating away at you. The fact that your own values or needs are so different. I would describe even my journey out was probably something around that. So I that's kind of like very broad. Finding the common denominator is around that, like emotional, cognitive issues with a structure that is so rigid.
And you find that different in the Jews?
I found that no, that I would say is a common denominator amongst everybody. If I expand a little bit broader, the Jews I spoke with so far, no, the only thing that I noticed was a fascinating common denominator was that one theological question that Jews don't have to face because their theology
No,
is
I get
different.
you. So it's more the
So
absence
that
of
thing.
it rather than the plus of it.
It was noticing almost like a pattern. Like if I was gonna try to bring out a lot of Christians at once, I would maybe put that question on a billboard because it's the antithesis to like Jesus loves you billboards is like if you haven't heard of Jesus, you're going to hell, and that's just weird because what if there aren't any billboards in Uganda? Like that kind of weird premise. But broadly, this type of like I never, part of me always struggled to fit in is a real common theme, for better or worse. Part of me wishes I had a better data or like more incriminating or something like that. But it seems to start with almost with personality, is I guess what I'm saying.
Well, it's one of those, the younger you are, the more people place on you. So you are a self fulfilling prophecy. If you grow up going, you're the odd one out, then you're going to be an odd one out, the chances are. So I grew up with people going, be careful of her, she's not going to be religious.
Some of these people,
Look at me
I know
now.
it's a narrative. You definitely had that. I don't know if everybody does. I've met some of the people I interviewed were like deeply conformist. Like it goes all the way to the other extreme, kind of more like what you spoke about at the beginning, the people who really put themselves in a box for the sake of religion. And still in that way, it's more soul crushing, right? Because you had to crush so much of yourself in a non-rebellious way for so many years. And then you look back and realize you just completely conformed. So that's like option 2. I have a theory about people leaving religion. I'll see if I change it as I speak to more people. That there's 3 types. There's those who leave because they never really fit in, and I think you're solidly in that box. There's those who leave for intellectual reasons, and those who leave for emotional reasons. And obviously there's some crossover. Those are like the 3 reasons, and some people have more or less of that mix. Like I was mostly emotional with some intellectual and very little rebellious.
Intellectual. None of it was intellectual until
Exactly.
people assumed it was, though, because I didn't end up on the floor or a sex worker or a drug addict or whatever, or a mental health institution, or
You had your wits
that
about
I
you,
could have said I
and you're
probably
smart.
did. I'm not stupid.
Yeah,
People
exactly.
always assumed it was about intellect, which I always found really
Right.
interesting because I can't answer. I wasn't intellectual. It's also why I think I was stupid, or I am stupid, because I wasn't ever clever within the religious world. I'm clever in the irreligious world, and not
Right.
also in an academic way. I am a very brain, people clever,
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than academia. Well, that's also down to my dyslexia. So people always assumed, they would be like, "Can I talk to you about theology?" And I'd be like, "No," because I
You
don't
can't.
actually
You
know how
can't.
to answer you. I've learned a lot
Yeah.
more, but it didn't start off that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much.
My
It's
pleasure.
been a great chat.